October 19, 1469. Valladolid. The groom arrived through the back door. Not through ceremony. Not through a formal entrance with banners and trumpets and the full pageantry that a royal wedding was supposed to require. Through the back door of the Palacio de los Vivero at night, having spent the previous 3 weeks disguised as a mule driver's assistant, crossing the entire width of Castile on back roads, sleeping in inns where nobody looked too closely at the group of muleteers and their unremarkable cargo. He was 17 years old. He was the heir to the crown of Aragon. And if the wrong person had recognized him on that road, if any of the dozens of nobles loyal to Enrique IV who controlled the castles along his route had stopped the mule traders and looked carefully at the young man in the cheap clothes leading the animals, the most consequential royal marriage in the history of Spain would have ended before it began. He made it. He walked in through the back door. He was led upstairs. He entered a room. Anne Gautier de Cardenas, the courtier who had spent months organizing the most clandestine royal wedding in Castilian history, leaned toward the 18-year-old woman waiting in the room and said the words that according to legend became the motto on his family's coat of arms forever after. "That is he. That is he." Isabel looked. Fernando looked back. They had never met. They had been negotiating their marriage through intermediaries for 2 years. They knew each other's political value, each other's strategic importance, each other's reputation. They knew almost nothing about each other as people. They had 5 days before the wedding. And the document that was supposed to make the wedding legal, the papal bull authorizing the marriage of 2 people who were second cousins, which the actual living pope had refused to issue, was a forgery. Signed by a pope who had been dead for 5 years. Stamped with a seal that had been bribed out of the papal nuncio in exchange for promises that the future king and queen of Spain would honor when they had the power to do so. None of this stopped either of them. Because this was not a love story. It was a political project. The most audacious political project of the 15th century. And it began on the night of October 19, 1469, with a back door and a mule driver's disguise and a forged document and 2 teenagers who had decided that the future of Spain was worth the risk. He crossed all of Castile disguised as a mule driver. She escaped her brother's surveillance using her dead brother's tomb as an excuse. Their papal document was signed by a pope who had been dead for 5 years. And when they finally met, 5 days before the wedding, neither of them had ever seen the other before. This is the most extraordinary royal wedding in history. Subscribe, like the video, and let's go through every detail. The marriage had not been inevitable. Isabel had been offered other options, and she had rejected every one of them with a directness that was, for a woman of her position and era, remarkable to the point of being dangerous. Enrique IV, her half-brother and king, had attempted to arrange her marriage 4 times. The first was to Carlos de Viana, heir to Navarre, a man of genuine culture and sad personal history who died before the negotiations concluded. The second was to Alfonso V of Portugal, a king of 50 who needed a politically useful young wife, a man old enough to be her father, a marriage that would have neutralized Isabel's Castilian political significance permanently by removing her from the kingdom. The third was Pedro Giron, whose death on the road she had prayed for. The fourth was Carlos de Valois, brother of the French king. A diplomatic piece in a game that had nothing to do with Castile's interests and everything to do with French ones. Isabel said no. Again and again, and in different diplomatic registers. Sometimes through intermediaries, sometimes through quiet obstruction, sometimes with the particular stubbornness of someone who has learned to wait out a weak man's decisions until he forgets he made them. She said no because she had already decided yes. The intelligence about Fernando of Aragon had been arriving for months. From Castilian nobles who had visited the Aragonese court, from diplomats, from the particular network of information that a woman in her position had to build informally because she had no official access to formal intelligence. What she learned was this: Fernando was 17 years old, physically capable, already proven in battle, politically intelligent, and crucially, the heir to a crown that shared a border with Castile. A marriage between them would not be a subordination. The capitulations of Cervera, signed in March 1469, made this explicit in writing. Fernando would come to Castile. Fernando would respect Castilian laws and institutions. Fernando would not interfere in the governance of Castile without Isabel's agreement. The document was careful, specific, and extraordinarily modern in its insistence on the equality of the 2 parties. Isabel had not chosen Fernando because she loved him. She had chosen him because the contract was right. The love, as it turned out, came later. But that is another story. May 1469. Ocana. Enrique IV, having finally understood that Isabel was not going to accept any of his marriage candidates and having received intelligence about the Aragonese negotiations, made a decision. He placed her under close custody in the royal palace at Ocana. Not a prison, she was still a princess, still treated with the formal courtesies of her position. But watched. The doors guarded. Her correspondence monitored. Her movements controlled. He thought this would stop her. It didn't. Isabel asked permission to travel to Avila to visit the tomb of her brother Alfonso, who had been buried there since his death the previous year. It was a reasonable request, pious, appropriate. A young woman wanting to pray at her dead brother's grave. Enrique gave her permission. She left Ocana and did not stop at Avila. She went to Valladolid, to the palace of Juan de Vivero, a man whose family was aligned with the Isabellan faction, and she waited. She had been there since August 30th. 49 days she waited in that palace, in a city that was sympathetic but not certain, for a groom who was crossing Castile in disguise. Fernando left Zaragoza on a September night with a small escort dressed as mule traders. The road through Castile was dangerous, castle after castle controlled by nobles loyal to Enrique, any of whom would have found the capture of Fernando of Aragon an extraordinary political and financial prize. He went through Ariza, Monteagudo, Verdejo, Gamera, Osma, Gumil. He picked up additional sympathetic men along the route until by the time he reached Duenas he had 200 riders, still dressed as merchants, still pretending to be ordinary commercial travelers on the Castilian roads. He arrived at the palace of the Count of Buendia in Duenas on October 9th. He rested. He was told that Isabel was waiting in Valladolid, less than 30 kilometers away. On the night of October 14th, Fernando rode to Valladolid. He came in through the back door of the Palacio de los Vivero. Gatir de Cardenas pointed him out. Isabel looked at the young man who had spent 3 weeks disguised as a mule driver to reach her. Fernando looked at the woman who had spent 49 days waiting in a borrowed palace for him to arrive. According to the chronicler Andrés Bernaldez, they caused each other a good impression. Some sources note that Isabel was nervous about the wedding night. Others note that Fernando was already composing his expression into the controlled courtesy of a young man meeting his political equal for the first time and needing to make it work. They had 5 days. The document was the problem. Isabel and Fernando were second cousins, both great-grandchildren of Juan I of Castile and Leonor of Aragon. Church law required a papal dispensation for cousins to marry. Pope Paul II had refused to issue one, calculating correctly that taking sides in the Castilian succession dispute was more trouble than the diplomatic goodwill was worth. Without the dispensation, the marriage was invalid under canon law. The solution that Isabel's inner circle devised was simple, audacious, and entirely illegal. They bribed Antonio Jacobo de Veneris, the papal nuncio, the Pope's official representative in Spain, the man who carried the seal and the authority of the Vatican in the peninsula, to fabricate a papal bull. Not from the current Pope who had refused. From his predecessor, Pius II, who had died in 1464. 5 years dead. Unable to confirm or deny anything. The forged document was dated June 1464. It authorized Fernando of Aragon to marry any princess within the 3rd degree of consanguinity. It bore the seal of a dead pope, arranged by a living papal official who had been paid to betray his office. On October 18th, Fernando swore to uphold the laws and institutions of Castile. The forged bull was read aloud. And on October 19, 1469 in the Sala Rica, the great hall of the Palacio de los Vivero in Valladolid, before an assembly of Castilian nobles and clergy who had aligned themselves with Isabel, Hernando de Talavera, the prior of the Prado Monastery, married Isabel of Castile to Fernando of Aragon. She was 18. He was 17. The wedding was not lavish. The sources record that the celebration was modest, constrained by the circumstances and the need for speed. They could not be certain how quickly the news would reach Enrique IV or how quickly he would act. There was music. There was a banquet. And then, as was the custom of the period, witnesses entered the bridal chamber to the sound of trumpets and flutes, and the sheet was displayed to the assembled guests as proof of the bride's virginity. Isabel had married a man she had met 5 days earlier, with a forged document, in secret, in defiance of the king and against the laws of the church she served. She had never looked more certain of anything in her life. When Enrique IV received the news, he did exactly what they had expected. He was furious. He declared the marriage invalid, the Treaty of Gisando, under which Isabel had been named his heir, broken, and Juana la Beltranilla, his disputed daughter, the legitimate heir to the Castilian crown. He secured from Pope Paul II a formal denunciation of the marriage. He began organizing the political coalition that would, within a few years, become the war. Isabel and Fernando, receiving this news in Valladolid, also did exactly what might have been expected. They ignored it. Not publicly, not provocatively. Isabel had learned in her childhood to be careful about which battles she fought openly. But strategically, with the clarity of two people who had committed to a course of action and understood that the only direction available was forward. She issued the sentence of Medina del Campo, her first major political act as a public figure, a careful and legally sophisticated statement of her position that managed to be both defiant of Enrique's authority and technically respectful of it, threading a needle that most advisors thought couldn't be threaded. Fernando went back to Aragon to handle his father's political affairs there. And Isabel discovered, in the first weeks of her marriage, something that no political calculation had prepared her for. She liked him. Not just as an ally, not just as a strategic partner, not just as the right choice for the capitulations of Cervera. She liked Fernando of Aragon as a person. His directness, his military competence, the particular kind of intelligence that she recognized because she had it herself, the way he could disagree with her without undermining her, the way the partnership functioned as something genuinely equal in a world where nothing about their arrangement was supposed to be equal. Fernando, for his part, was reportedly somewhat overwhelmed. He had arrived at that back door expecting a political arrangement. He found something more complicated. The chroniclers record that in the early years of their marriage, whenever Fernando left to attend to Aragonese affairs, Isabel's mood visibly changed. That when word came of his return, she was seen to be lighter, more animated, more herself. She had chosen him for political reasons. She had not expected to love him. That, in the end, might have been the most extraordinary thing about the wedding that changed everything. The marriage cost her almost immediately. Enrique IV's declaration broke the Toros de Guisando agreement. Isabel was no longer the recognized heir. Juana la Beltranilla, whose legitimacy was disputed, whose father was possibly not Enrique at all, was now officially the next Queen of Castile. The Portuguese king Alfonso V began considering his options. Juana was his niece. A marriage between them would give him a claim to Castile, backed by the Portuguese army, backed by Enrique's official endorsement, backed by the papal condemnation of Isabel's marriage. The trap was closing. Isabel and Fernando were young, newly married, politically isolated, excommunicated. The Pope had joined Enrique in condemning the marriage, with no army to speak of and an enemy coalition that included the King of Castile, the King of Portugal, and the institutional authority of the Catholic Church. They had each other. They had the loyalty of a fraction of the Castilian nobility. They had the forged document, which would eventually be regularized in 1471 when Pope Sixtus IV issued the Bulla de Simancas, but that was 2 years away. And they had something that Enrique IV, for all his official power, did not have. A clear idea of what they were doing and why. Enrique IV died in December 1474. 5 years after the backdoor wedding, 5 years after the forged papal document, 5 years after the excommunication and the broken treaty and the beginning of the war that was coming. Isabel was in Segovia when she heard. She did not wait for Fernando. She could not. He was in Aragon, days away, and the window for claiming the throne of Castile was measured in hours, not days. She walked out into the main square of Segovia in the December cold. She was 23 years old. She proclaimed herself Queen of Castile. Alone. The girl who had grown up in Arevalo watching a closed door, the princess nobody had wanted, the woman who had married a mule driver through a back entrance with a forged document, she stood in the square at Segovia and said the words that made everything that came before it worth the cost. The war was still to come. But the claim was made.